From LEGO Star Wars to KOTOR, from The Force Unleashed to Battlefront 2, Star Wars has a long history of popular and genre-defining video games, despite primarily being a movie franchise. Many of these games were beloved not just by a generation of Star Wars fans, but by anybody that enjoyed video games, becoming important cultural touchstones for an entire generation of gamers. But in recent years, Star Wars games have become the subject of controversy all too often, many times for reasons outside of the core gameplay. Despite every other medium, from the tabletop to the big screen, receiving a near-endless stream of new content, the Star Wars video game release schedule has slowed to a crawl, with about half as many releases in the last 10 years after the Disney acquisition than the 10 years before that. But the Star Wars games that we have gotten in the past 10 years have reviewed fairly well and often sold even better. So why does Disney seem so uncharacteristically willing to leave money on the table by not making more games? Well, first let's talk about Battlefront 2. When I say Battlefront 2, there's probably a decent subsection of people watching that immediately think back to fond memories playing one of the greatest split-screen games ever made. But ever since 2017, the words Battlefront 2 have also invoked the memory of a monetization system so scummy that it literally provoked governmental investigation in multiple countries. The game was designed from the ground up to drain the player's wallet as much as possible, even after paying full price for the game itself. And that initial controversy left a stain on the game even after player pushback successfully got microtransactions removed from the game permanently. In most ways, Battlefront 2 was, ironically, a truly worthy successor to its namesake, with cinematic gameplay and fantastic multiplayer, and even a passionate team of developers that did as much as they could to improve the game in the time they were given. But after a while, EA forcibly pulled the dev team away from Battlefront, abandoning a healthy and enthusiastic community. Battlefront still has a fairly healthy player base to this day, but the lack of fresh content has taken its toll on the game, and EA at this point has just completely abandoned the series, letting cheaters run wild and reportedly shooting down proposals for a third Battlefront now that the opportunity to implement microtransactions has passed. And that's really what it comes down to. The AAA developers that have been put at the helm of this particular aspect of the Star Wars franchise are massive corporations, and ultimately decent sales on a game that they can't monetize at a later date just isn't enough to move the needle. Sure, games like Jedi Fallen Order have sold tens of millions of copies, bringing the extreme popularity of Souls-like combat to the world of Star Wars in a narratively satisfying way, but no matter how much the player enjoys the Jedi games, they're only getting your money once, and they're pretty costly to produce. This creates a fundamental disconnect, because when you ask players what they want to see more of, they're going to refer to games like Jedi Survivor as the biggest success stories for Star Wars gaming in the past decade. But if you sat down with an executive in charge of which games actually get made, they'd probably point to Galaxy of Heroes, a game that you might not have even heard of. And that's because Galaxy of Heroes is a mobile game. More specifically, a mobile gacha game that is made over $1 billion. How? Well, most people probably don't know this, but Galaxy of Heroes was actually my first foray into content creation. During COVID, before I had ever made a single video on YouTube, I used to stream on Twitch. I streamed a lot of different stuff, but more often than not, for whatever reason, my best performing streams were Galaxy of Heroes, which has an unusually passionate community. I didn't have any particular passion for the game myself. In fact, I kind of think it sucks, but what I did enjoy was the opportunity to scroll through character rosters and talk about Star Wars with whoever happened to be in my chat. But as my streams became a bit more popular, one specific interaction would play out more and more often. You see, as I said earlier, I didn't really like the game, and as a result, I was entirely free to play. I never spent a single cent on the game, and for whatever reason, this seemed to really frustrate some people. I'd be urged repeatedly to just buy the Hyperdrive bundle, with viewers in my chat telling me that such a cheap upgrade would give me an absurd amount of value to improve my roster and quit wasting my time on the earlier parts of the game. The problem? This supposedly cheap intro pack was $100. But as I talked to more and more of these loyal customers, I realized that for a lot of these people, that really was just a drop in the bucket. Many Galaxy of Heroes players hadn't just spent some money, many of them were telling me they had spent thousands. Some tens of thousands, and several even informed me that they had spent enough to have bought a house, spending hundreds of thousands of dollars upgrading multiple accounts. Unfortunately, this is the secret for how a mobile game that looks like this has averaged over $100 million in profit yearly for the past decade. Not only are these games more effective at getting large amounts of cash out of people than the highest quality PC or console game could ever be, but they're unbelievably cheap to make by comparison. Mobile games don't have to worry about modeling complex environments, coding layers of nuanced mechanics, or paying actors for motion capture or voice work. They don't have to pay a narrative team or work with the Lucasfilm Story Group to make sure their game fits in the Star Wars canon. And when you start paying attention to mobile games, you realize just how many of these games get made as a result. Because the risk is so low and the reward so high that developers can afford to release 10 mobile games and shutter 9 of them after 6 months, as long as one game catches on enough to make them record profits. This approach isn't just concerning because the focus on mobile games is taking developers' attention away from PC and console releases, though it is. It's also directly harmful to the games that do get made. The Battlefront 2 controversy didn't come from nowhere. That was EA attempting to monetize Battlefront in the same exact way that they monetize their mobile games. Even the new Ubisoft title is taking full advantage of these practices, cramming multiple deluxe editions, mission packs, and even a day one season pass into a fully single-player open-world game with a base price of $70, all while keeping the game off Steam to make sure that nobody else gets a cut of their precious profits. But people's expectations for mobile games are so much lower than their expectations for normal video games, and these methods only serve to obscure what are otherwise often very good games. After all, it's not all doom and gloom. These games are fun, partially because Star Wars lends itself so well to most types of gameplay, whether it be competitive multiplayer or more story-based games. But nobody can enjoy games that don't get made. Yes, the games industry is a mess right now at the AAA level, and a lot of these projects have been canceled before they can see the light of day. But a lot of these problems can be alleviated by picking the right man for the job. It's honestly absurd that in an era of online multiplayer, there is not a single Star Wars game actively receiving new content. And not only that, there hasn't been one in several years. When Star Wars wants to make a big swing and release an online game, the team behind it needs to be willing to foster an enthusiastic community and then support that community for years to come. Nowadays, many of the top games, both in popularity and in profits, are online titles that have been running for years, in some cases over a decade. And when you loyally support a community like that for years, they in turn become loyal to you, either because they genuinely like your product or just because they're addicted. But not everything has to be a big swing, and this is where I think Disney needs to learn from themselves, more specifically from Star Wars Visions, a project that put the Star Wars franchise in the hands of smaller teams across the world to produce short story anime episodes that would have never been made by a larger team with a different perspective. Similarly, indie games are currently in a golden age and represent an opportunity to bring the beloved Star Wars galaxy to genres that larger developers don't often explore. To be fair, many of these issues are not specific to just Star Wars games. The games industry is a mess, with mass layoffs happening across many AAA developers. Don't pre-order and don't pay full price is pretty good advice for any game, no matter the genre or franchise. And the slower release schedule can be partially attributed to the continually increasing effort it requires to make video games as technology advances. But there's a huge disconnect between Disney's ability to pump out movies, TV shows, books, comics, even tabletop games, and their complete inability to get a video game made more than once every couple years. Star Wars has nearly unlimited potential for all types of gameplay. And personally, I'll always hold out hope for a full-on Star Wars space sim, but no matter what form it takes, I look forward to a time when Star Wars maintains more of a presence in online gaming.